Thanks, but I'm done with this now!
Looks like the rumors of your immortality are true.
It's time to start the ritual.
The black box is a really simple weapon concept at its core. I mean, if you compare it to some of Soldier's other weapons, this becomes painfully apparent. You know, you've got something like the Beggar's Bazooka, which introduces this really cool and unique overload mechanic which drastically changes the way you play Soldier. You're essentially trading off precision for pure chaos. Very fun chaos at that, as your rockets have a small amount of random deviation, meaning they can go all over the place. The Beggar's also opens up new avenues for rocket jumping with the misfire mechanic, as overloading your clip allows you to rocket jump mid-air for some insane speed. All of this hidden complexity wrapped up in just one weapon. And it doesn't even end there either, because in direct contrast to the Beggars sits the direct hit, which is an unlockable that punishes inaccuracy and rewards precision. You trade off 70% of your explosion radius for more damage, more projectile speed, and the ability to mini-crit airborne enemies. This weapon is like the epitome of get good, as in the hands of a competent player, this thing can be scary as all hell. It's great for dealing with engineers and their sentries, and it also has the ability to remove scouts from existence at point blank range. It's very hard to use consistently, but if you put in the time, you can dominate any server you set foot in. And again, look at all that complexity, it's another great weapon concept. And then, there's the black box. You give up a rocket in your clip, and in turn, you get some health back when they hit. Well, this change actually has some fairly drastic repercussions on Soldier's entire playstyle. But before I get too ahead of myself on that, let's unpack the weapon in full, starting with the numbers. On hit, the black box provides up to 20 health per attack. Now up to is pretty non-specific, so how does this actually work in action? Well, when you shoot a rocket, it deals damage, anywhere in the range of 24 at max distance to 112 at point blank. Now what the old black box would have done is reward you a flat 15 health back if your rocket hit anyone for any damage at any range, which was slightly problematic, because you could be on the other side of the map, fire a rocket from behind cover which barely touches your enemy, and be rewarded with almost 1/10 of your health back instantly. Now this provided Soldier with way too much self-sustain when dealing pretty pitiful amounts of damage at range, so when Gunmetal rolled around in 2015, this healing mechanic was changed slightly. Rather than providing a flat amount, healing would now scale off the amount of damage your rocket did, at a rate of 1 health point for every 4.5 damage dealt. This means that those pesky long-range rockets would now only provide 6 health points rather than 15, so you can no longer just spam out the battlements where some gibbous snipers are camping and expect to replenish your whole health bar. These changes also did affect Soldier's mid-range combat, as rockets that deal between 50 and 60 damage would now heal slightly less at around 11 to 13 health points, which is a slight nerf but is honestly pretty negligible, especially if you're running something like the Conch, but we'll talk about that thing later. So to reach that previous guaranteed 15 health per rocket, you need to deal 68 damage, which I personally think is a reasonable amount. Now to compensate for all these nerfs, the black box was buffed to provide more healing at close range, capping out at 20 health per rocket when you deal a total of 90 damage or more, which exceeds that previous 15 health threshold. Alright, so that's the main gist with how the numbers and stats work, but what does it actually look like in game? Well, we all know that managing your health is very important to TF2, and like any other first person shooter, the game essentially revolves around it. And this is especially the case for a class like Soldier, who not only tends to bear the brunt of the enemy team's damage most of the time, but also has to factor in additional complexities like rocket jumping, which also complicate health management. It is therefore crucial that the Soldier remains at a decently high level of health throughout the game, when you're facing danger more often than the rest of your team. But that can be quite challenging without the presence of a medic. And well, that's where this guy comes in, as it's this scenario where there is no medic that the black box proves most useful, and it's generally my most common reason for running the item. Now I know what you're thinking, elmaxo, why don't you just swap to medic and be the change you want to see in the world? And to that I simply say, no. The additional HP the black box rewards for damage allows you to spend more time on the front line due to your increased self-sustainability. Each clip you're firing off into a choke point full of enemies is rewarding you with anywhere between 30 and 60 HP, which really extends the time you can spend helping your team in battle. STJesus actually talked about a similar idea in his video on the battalion's backup.
You buy you and your team more time. You take longer to kill, which gives you more time to push or to hold.
So at their core, these two weapons actually fulfill a similar function, in that they extend your time window on the front line, which is invaluable for pushing or holding. And yes, of course they do this in a different manner, as the battalion's backup provides a much stronger but shorter form of sustainability in the form of flat resistances for 10 seconds, whereas the black box gives you these small bursts of regen which add up in the long term to keep you alive longer. Half the time I actually find myself not even really registering the amount of utility that the black box actually provides, because if you are playing relatively safely, your health bar will just naturally hover around that 200 level from the amount of damage you're putting out. It's only when you get into those tense low health scenarios where I'll find myself praying that I do enough damage to regain that little bit more HP I need to survive one more meat shot or direct rocket from the enemy. So if I had to boil down the benefits of running the black box, it kinda just makes you exist for way longer than you would with any other rocket launcher, which means more time pushing, defending, or fragging your little heart out. Also, before I move on to the downsides of the weapon, I had nowhere else to put this, but god, this thing seems to random crit every other rocket I was shooting, like holy shit. Oh my god. I don't know what it is about me, I don't know if there's a glitch with it, but this thing really seems to like to triple its damage for no reason when I'm using it. Okay, whatever, we're moving on. We're moving on to the downsides. It ain't all sunshine and rainbows with the black box, as it does come with one pretty severe downside, and that's only having 3 rockets in your clip. On paper this doesn't really sound all that bad, because one less rocket just means you might be reloading a bit more than you're usually comfortable with. And whilst that definitely is a factor to it, there is a more important downside to only having 3 rockets. It really limits your ability to play hyper aggressively. What I personally love about the Soldier, and why he is my most played class, is that yes, you have the potential to deal out extremely high levels of AoE damage. That's awesome, but what makes that even better is that you can do it whilst being hyper mobile through rocket jumping, which makes doing the whole damage dealing part like 100 times more fun. My general strategy goes something like this. I'll use 1 rocket to jump towards my enemy who is usually out of position. I'll then use my next 2 rockets to pick off this enemy, and then I'll use my final rocket to jump away to safety, whether that's a health pack or my team's medic. Now yes, there are obviously a lot more nuances to this playstyle than just that, but for the sake of argument, let's just run with it. If we substitute the black box in over the rocket launcher, it essentially makes this style of play completely redundant, as only having 3 rockets really limits your ability to rocket jump aggressively. Because if we go back to that last example, you'll use 1 rocket to jump in, you'll use 2 rockets to pick off the enemy, and then you kinda got your dick in your hands, like you can't really get out quickly because you're out of rockets. And this whole scenario becomes a whole lot more awkward if you happen to miss a rocket on your enemy, as you'll have to waste even more time reloading, which leaves you vulnerable to your enemy and their team. There is the added bonus of having rockets which regenerate your health, which definitely does help in these scenarios, but often that additional 30 to 40 health you'd be getting back isn't as advantageous as having an additional rocket loaded, which can finish off your enemy or let you escape quicker in a pinch. Another way in which this reduced clip size hurts you is when you're up against an engineer, as having 1 less rocket in your clip makes it much more challenging to take out a sentry. The additional downtime it takes to reload rockets gives the Engie more time to repair their buildings, reload their rescue ranger, or find additional ammo, which makes your job of taking it out a whole bunch harder. And this is only amplified if they're using something like the Wrangler, which makes it pretty much impossible to deal with the thing. In a scenario like that, you're going to have to either A, stop the direct hit, B, use a secondary like the battalion's backup, which I'll talk a bit about later, or C, pray that your team is competent enough to help you. Otherwise, you're going to be stuck there for a while trying to spam it out. And finally, there's a simple criticism that some people overlook when they pick up the black box, and that's sometimes you just really don't need that extra healing. I know it sounds obvious, but if you have a semi-competent medic who is managing to divvy up heals amongst the team effectively, this weapon really doesn't have much of a purpose, and you end up being stuck with 1 less rocket. Alright, well that's all well and good, we've got the upsides and the downsides covered, but we are forgetting about that whole secondary weapon slot the Soldier has, which can kinda drastically change how you end up using the black box. And the first subsection of those secondaries I want to talk about are the shotguns. I'm going to lump them all together here because they all fulfill the same function, and ultimately just comes down to your own preference as to which one you want to end up using. Now given that you'll find yourself awkwardly reloading mid-battle more often with the black box, having some secondary firepower is definitely a valuable tool to have in your arsenal. This is because shotguns pretty much negate the main downside of the black box, which is that lost rocket, because we all know that
Switching to your pistol is always faster than reloading.
the panic attack and reserve shooter are especially good options with their additional swap speed, as it makes your combos between rockets a lot quicker and more lethal. But to be honest, I can't say I actually found myself using shotguns too often in conjunction with the black box. Don't get me wrong, I definitely think they are perfectly viable options, but some of the other unlocks, man, have you seen how good the banners are? The banners all provide their own situational benefit, so I find myself rotating through them fairly frequently when I use the black box, and the first one up is the buff banner. Whilst I think that this is the weakest option out of the three, the ability to mini crit does wonders given the fact that you have one less rocket loaded in your clip at all times. Now if you know anything about mini crits and how they work, which I think I do after reading about them on the TF wiki for like 5 minutes, you'll know that they ignore damage fall off. So once you deploy the buff banner, you not only get that additional 35% damage, but you can also start regenerating a significant chunk of your health back from enemies at longer ranges, which really helps to maximize your self-sustainability. Overall, it's a pretty good secondary to use in pubbing, so I'm feeling a light 7 on this one. Next up is the Battalion's backup. Now I know I alluded to this before, but Cesty Jesus made a phenomenal video on this item which you should definitely watch because the power of this thing is unbelievable. It passively provides you with 20 HP, which is a nice touch and generally helps with your survivability. But the buff it provides once you accrue 600 damage is honestly broken. Having damage, crit, and sentry resistances all at once makes you and your team borderline indestructible. It also helps to cover up for the black box's weakness in dealing with engineers, as you have more time to face it one-on-one with sentry resistances. You'll still probably need the help of your team to take it down, but people do tend to group when any banner is active, so it should be slightly easier. I find myself running this banner most commonly on offense when facing a lot of sentries, but honestly its power of stopping random crits is enough for me to say it's useful. Overall I'm feeling a decent to strong 8 on this one. And finally, the secondary you've probably all been waiting for, the conch. Now look, let me get one thing out of the way immediately. If my team doesn't have a medic, this item will be equipped along with the black box 9 times out of 10 because of the insane level of self-sustain it provides you. Now if you don't know how this weapon works, it has two sides to it, the passive and the active. The passive provides you with health per second that scales up the longer you haven't taken any damage for. It begins at 1 health per second for the first 4 to 5 seconds, before slowly increasing up to 4 health after 9 seconds of not taking damage. I tested this for a little bit and found it was actually pretty inconsistent when it decided to tick over to 2 or 3 health per second, but it always seemed to hit that 4 health mark after 9 seconds, so I don't know. This just gives you another layer of survivability on top of the black box, which already does a decent job at it. Now the other half of the weapon is the active, which you tame after dealing 480 damage, which is 120 less than the other banners, and it provides you and your teammates with 35% lifesteal on the damage you inflict to your enemies, along with a decent speed boost. So let's take a look at this in action. If you hit a maximum damage point blank rocket for 112 damage, you will heal back 20 from your black box, and an additional 39 from your conch buff to get back a total of 59 health from just one rocket. And remember, it also applies to the teammates around you, also giving them a speed boost and a 35% lifesteal. The amount of self-sustain these two items provide in conjunction is honestly scary, and is my personal favourite combination when there's no medic and I'm looking to dominate a casual server. I mean, for God's sake, TF Wiki even knows how immortal you are when you use this thing.
I did not have permission to die!
Unfortunately though, these two items have quite the notorious reputation amongst the TF2 community for being a bit of a crutch loadout, and honestly I think it is a little warranted. Also, don't think that this loadout is broken by any means, because I mean, if you have a medic pocketing you, it's pretty much the same thing. I do think it provides you with a level of safety that can definitely be frustrating to play against at times. But you just need to consider how much firepower the soldier foregoes to obtain this level of self-sustain, as forfeiting both an extra rocket in the clip and a damaging secondary can leave the soldier feeling quite underwhelming at times. But overall, I'm feeling a Tabimpa butterfly, a kids see ghosts even, maybe a money store. That's right, that's a 10 out of 10. The conch is a 10 out of 10. The only other secondary of value to bring up here is probably the gunboats, unless you like the bison or something, and in which case, go for it. But personally, the gunboats are definitely my favourite secondary of choice in general for the soldier. As I alluded to earlier, I love rocket jumping, but we know that can be problematic when you equip the black box for a variety of reasons. But at its core, the gunboats and the rocket jumping resistances it gives you are another one of those kind of universally useful things to have as a soldier. Now whilst I don't think it plays to the black box's strengths, and probably encourages an unfavourable playstyle that will leave you wishing you just had stock equipped, it's definitely still a viable option to consider. Also, while I was writing a script, I kind of realised I forgot about melee weapons, so I'm just going to lump them here. Personally, there's only 2 really viable options if you're pubbing in my opinion, and that's the disciplinary action or the escape plan. I'm not going to go too in depth because this video is long enough, but each of these provide their own situational benefit which I think works well with the black box. I don't mention the market gardener for an obvious reason, and that's because I don't rocket jump aggressively when I use the black box. So personally, I don't think I'd find myself using it all that often. But if I am using stock and playing my preferred hyper aggressive bombing style, you already know it's going to be my go-to melee weapon. And look at that. For a pretty simple weapon design, there's definitely a lot to unpack with the black box, as it does pretty drastically change the way you have to play Soldier. Now, do I think the weapon is in a good place? Overall, yeah, I think it's pretty good. I think it is balanced fairly well in its current state, as it serves as a very safe and practical side grade to stock. Compared to all these other crazy unlocks like the Beggars and the Airstrike, the black box is comparatively much safer and a nice option to have when you need it. It definitely fulfills the niche of having extra self-sustain, which can be very valuable in scenarios where you don't have a medic, or you're versing a competent team, or if you're just playing on a map that doesn't have that many health packs to go around. And yes, it is painful to give up that extra rocket sometimes, because it makes my favourite playstyle a whole lot harder to pull off. But sometimes, that extra health is just what you need to win the game, especially when you really don't want to play medic. Before we click off, I just want to say thanks so much for watching this video and making it all the way to the end, because it has been a pretty long one. It's probably the most time I have ever dedicated to a video, and there are a few things I would change if I could go back. Like, I don't think I talked about the benefits as long as I should have, but it was pretty good overall. So it would be great if you subscribed, you left a like and all that stuff to boost us in the algorithm. The only other thing I want to mention is that I have started a Discord server which I'm going to be very active on. So I've left a link to that below in the description if you want to join and check it out. That's all. So thanks again for watching, and hopefully you can stick around to see some more videos.